My name is Jad Mawad. I am the head of the IEA's communications. Our guest today is Mr. Seamus O'Regan, Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, who is going to talk today about keeping people and communities at the heart of a green economic recovery. With us, of course, is Dr. Fatih Birol, our Executive Director, who will take the floor, followed by a presentation from Minister O'Regan. Today's event is being live streamed, of course, across all of our channels and on social media. And our audience online can send us questions for Minister O'Regan at bigideas@iea.org. With that, I will turn the floor now to Dr. Birol, our Executive Director. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, thank you all for joining us today. I am delighted to welcome all of you once again, IEA's Big Ideas Distinguished Speaker Series. We have started this series a few years ago, and we have hosted at the IEA in our headquarters, very close to Eiffel Tower here, and presidents of the countries, the ministers, business leaders, thought leaders, to hear their perspectives, to get their views and have a good discussion. Just a few weeks ago, we moved to the virtual version of our Big Ideas series. Our first, in the virtual context, our first guest was Mr. Dan Brouillette, who is the Secretary of Energy of United States. And today I am equally honored to welcome Mr. Seamus O'Regan, Minister of Natural Resources of Canada. Mr. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. It's a great honor for me and for our agency, sir.
It's great to be here, Fatih. I wish I was closer to the Eiffel Tower. I think that's quite lovely, but maybe not.
I am sure, Mr. Minister, especially we have a wonderful, beautiful weather today in Paris, about 27 degrees Celsius. Not too hot, beautiful weather. And
Perfect.
Hopefully next time when you come to Paris, you will have a wonderful view of Eiffel Tower and be our guest, please, Mr. Minister.
I count on it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Dear colleagues, the topic of our discussion today is, I think it is very timely and very relevant to the discussions that we have around the world. It is focusing on the very issue of while most of the world wants to see economic recovery, sustainable economic recovery, how do we make sure that we keep the people and communities at the heart of a sustainable economic recovery? And this is a critical issue for all of us. After the coronavirus problem has started, we at the IEA measure the impact of this pandemic on the energy, and we came up that this year global energy demand will almost collapse, if I may say so, and the decline this year in global energy demand will be, just to give an idea, 7 times larger than what we have seen after the great financial crisis in 2008-2009. Big decline. Emissions are also declining, but there is a huge risk, as the IEA has several times repeated. With the economic recovery, we may see emissions to go back, rebound where they were before, if we do not take the right recovery paths. And it is the reason why we came up as the IEA, working with IMF, our International Monetary Fund colleagues together with a sustainable recovery plan, how we can see on one hand economic growth, jobs created, but at the same time addressing our climate problem. And in that context, only a few days ago, 9th of July, we organized a clean energy transitions summit, again virtual, some 40 ministers around the world. North America, all the ministers. Mr. Minister, you were there. Thank you very much for that. US Minister, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, all European ministers, but also China, India, Japan, Indonesia, South Africa, and others. We all discuss how we can accelerate the clean energy transitions. And Mr. Minister, I am thankful to you, in addition to giving a wonderful, outstanding speech at that summit. You also chair one of the perhaps the most interesting topics on that day, which is on the inclusive and equitable recovery. So we were happy with that discussion. And not only we had so many 40 ministers around the world, but almost 2 million people follow that debate around the world. And I can tell you, Mr. Minister, we are already receiving a lot of requests to follow this debate with you as well today, and very much looking forward to hear your views. Especially, dear colleagues, to hear Mr. Minister's must be very important for many energy and climate observers, because Canada, on one hand, made very strong climate pledges, targets, net zero emission by 2050. On the other hand, we know that Canada is a major oil and gas producer, and as such, what kind of path Canada will follow will be very important, not only for Canada, but for the rest of the world. Now, we know that you, Mr. Minister, have a series of measures in your country, how you can combine these two important aspects of the recovery in Canada. But I would, before we go to our discussion, I would very much like to ask you, Mr. Minister, to share with you your thoughts, your perspective from your government's point of view before we go to our interview. But before giving to you the word, let me thank you once again for sparing time for the International Energy Agency and thousands of people today viewing us around the world. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister.
Well, and thank you, Fatih. I mean, I'm quite grateful to you and to the leadership of the International Energy Agency. I mean, as you said, we had that important discussion 2 weeks ago on clean energy transitions, that ministerial, and as you said, I mean, 2 million people have tuned into that. People are engaged in this subject. But on a personal level too, there is so much change that's occurring in the world. And I think for energy ministers all over the world, they are dealing with significant challenges. So I quite enjoy attending these ministerials. I have to tell you, it is not a duty, it is a distinct pleasure for two reasons. Firstly, because you get to share ideas with others, you get a clear idea of what other countries are doing. But secondly, there are only a few of us, I think, who understand, these positions and the challenges we're confronting. So it feels almost, if you will, like a support group of ministers from all over the world, and the support is good. The solidarity is good. I remember on that day on clean energy transitions, we discussed the challenge that we collectively face as we focused on a post-COVID economic recovery. How do you balance the urgency of combating climate change with a more inclusive future, one that is defined by a shared prosperity? Because those inequities in our societies are becoming more defined and more visible to people. So that is becoming a big issue for many of us as well. We don't take our eyes off achieving net zero by 2050. In fact, I think we're emboldened. And I have said in this country, and Canada is the fourth largest producer of oil and gas in the world. It is our largest export, but there is no way that we'll be getting to net zero without our oil and gas sector. That is our challenge. It is, as I say, a major contributor to our prosperity, but the future of the sector, I think, is tied to a meaningful commitment to get to net zero. You released a special report earlier this month, the IEA, which noted that without a major acceleration in clean energy innovation, that our net zero emissions target will not be achieved. And that means innovation in both traditional and renewable energy production. that both of those have to be the core of any sustainable future. And the good news is that work, I think, is already underway. In fact, the petroleum sector is our largest investor in clean technology and innovation, funnels more than $1 billion into clean technology investments every year. And the even better news is that it's working. Our per barrel emissions in our oil sands, for instance, have decreased by almost 30% over the past 2 decades. We have to increase that level of, or that rate of change, but we're getting there. And as I noted at the start, that effort is not just environmentally necessary, it's essential to the industry's future success. I think you probably, because I see you quoted in the Financial Times and The Economist all the time, and it's terrific that you're driving the agenda in periodicals like that. And I was quite taken with an article by Nick Butler in last week's, I think, Sunday Financial Times. And he summed it up quite well. He said, resisting the pathway towards renewables has been recognized as both futile and bad business. That is really quite a statement. Resisting the pathway towards renewables has been recognized as both futile and bad business. And we've already seen it. You know, big money flowing away from investments that aren't deemed to be green enough. And where's it going? It's going to places with a plan. In Canada, we are implementing and expanding our plan. Many of our domestic producers have already joined our government's commitment to net zero by 2050. And all of this work is coming as we're making big investments in renewables, in clean power, in low emissions fuels, in carbon capture technology, energy efficiency. And when I say low emissions fuels, I'm specifically talking about natural gas and hydrogen, which seems, I think, to be, you know, the buzzword of the day these days, and I think for good reason. But I want to take a moment here just to focus on the importance of energy efficiency, which we've discussed. And as you've often said, Fatih, energy efficiency, the energy we don't use, is our cheapest, most abundant energy source. And by that, I mean the improvements in energy efficiency, they will account for 40% of the emissions reductions that the world is committed to in the Paris Accord, 40%. So I'm going to make an announcement today. Canada is joining the 3% club. So those 15 other countries that have committed to a 3% improvement in global energy efficiency every year will be joining that club. And I think this is important because our government, by doing this, is enabling Canadians to fight climate change in a way that's accessible to them, in a way that's tangible to them, where they live, where they work, where they play. I think energy efficiency is incredibly important. So we are proud to be joining the global leaders in this space. We're also investing massively in powering our homes, our cities, our vehicles with more clean electricity. And in doing that, we're also managing methane emissions through the supply chain. So I think while the pandemic has changed the state of play, it hasn't changed our resolve in building a cleaner energy future, nor has it kept us from focusing on people and communities. In Canada, and I think around the world, our recovery will only be possible if it is inclusive. We cannot leave people behind. And I speak to you from an energy producing province and an energy producing country, but at the far end of this country, Newfoundland and Labrador. Newfoundland being an island, you know, in the middle of the North Atlantic, closer to Ireland and the UK than it is to Toronto. And it is a place that, as the Minister of Natural Resources and an elected member from this place, speaking to you from this place, I will not leave energy workers behind or their families, or a region like mine here in Newfoundland and Labrador, or Alberta, or Saskatchewan in this country. They have to be, every one of these places has to be included every step of the way. As I said, that the pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities and inequities that exist between our communities and within our communities. Job losses and reduced working hours have been felt disproportionately by women, by youth, in this country by Indigenous people, immigrants, racialized peoples or persons with disabilities. So people must be at the center of the economic recovery. And if people don't feel included, then they could slow down or halt the momentum that we're creating here. But where they are included, and I think energy efficiency is an excellent opening to this. It's tangible, it's meaningful, and something that people can do. And if you create that momentum, then we will reach that cleaner, brighter future, that more prosperous future. And you know, I'll get into more of that, I think, in the Q&A. But let me say here that if we get this recovery right, we will not only empower workers and communities, but we will build the social acceptance for the work that we talk about here on the fight to combat climate change, to build a net zero future. We'll tap into the potential that comes from a diversity of perspectives and talents.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Great speech, but of course, for me, the very nice part is the surprise that Canada is joining to the 3% club. For thousands of my colleagues just brought me the numbers, thousands of people who are following us. You may not know what's a 3% club. It is the led by the International Energy Agency, an initiative to do the following. Global energy efficiency improves in the last few years on average about 1.5%. And in order to reach our climate goals, we have to at least double this. And we have asked several governments to be a part of it. And I am very, very happy, Mr. Minister, that Canada is also joining to 15 other countries from Americas, Europe, Africa, Asia, and elsewhere. So thank you very much for this great news, Mr. Minister. Mr. Minister, we will talk a few things on energy and climate, but before that, if I may ask you a personal question, if you want to answer, of course. It is now almost 8 months, if I'm not wrong. You took office, maybe a bit more than that. And some of the colleagues who are watching us around the world may not know, but before taking this very important job, you were a famous, I was told my Canadian colleagues, a very famous journalist in Canada, lots of recognition, awards, and the others. Now, moving from a job who asks questions, who comments on the things, to a job, a very important job, who answers the questions and who answers the comments coming from the public. What kind of similarities, if there are any, or the differences you see, Mr. Minister? And was it easy to go from this side of the table to the other side of the table, Mr. Minister?
No, it was not, Fatih. It was not easy at all. You hit the nail on the head. Journalists are used to asking the questions, the tough questions. We are in a position now where we have to have the answers. That is an altogether different thing. And you have competing, interests in when you answer a question, you've all sorts of responsibilities in making sure that you get the answer right. Where I used to be, most of the television I did, it was our national morning show here in Canada called Canada AM, and 3 hours of live television every morning with a bit of everything, like most morning shows are. But because so many people watched us, we got significant players in almost every field, whether it be politics or policy or energy or entertainment or movies or whatever. So it was a mixed bag, but being curious, I think, is a consistent thing, and something that I had before and I have now. I still spoke then about the things that interested me before I got into journalism. I spoke in this country about Indigenous issues and the inequities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities here in this country, and so I'm kind of back where I started. I grew up in Labrador, which is the northern part of the province. I'm in Newfoundland and Labrador, so it was a northern community, fly in, fly out for most of the year when I grew up there. And you saw, growing up in the north, the inequities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, the First Nation that was very close to where I grew up. So when I did my undergraduate degree, it was in that. I wanted to learn more. I worked in the provincial government on land claims issues, on working with them to reclaim their rights, but also to look forward to prosperity and what natural resource development they could participate in. I worked in the provincial government for 5 years on that, and then I did my master's degree in the UK on Indigenous participation in natural resource development. So I feel very at home in this space. It's a place that I feel very passionately about. And I was speaking about inclusivity in natural resource development 20 years ago in the work that I was doing. It was something that I kept up in my time as a journalist as much as I could. And now here I am. So it is a weight of responsibility, but it is something I feel very passionately about. And I think, like yourself, and I think many people who are interested in this sector, they feel passionately about it. I come at it from the perspective of wanting to see our natural resources sector in this country continue to prosper. It is vital to a country like Canada, which is, there's probably no democracy in the world that holds as much bounty of natural resource wealth as we do. Getting it right in a world in which we're combating climate change and making sure that we don't leave people behind, that is something. The inclusivity part of that is something I've held on to for years, and now it's just accentuated with climate change. I'm right at home, in other words.
Wonderful, Mr. Minister. So, patient as a journalist and patient as a minister, and you are, in fact, looking at your master thesis, you are implementing your master thesis now as a minister. What a wonderful opportunity, sir. Mr. Minister, moving a bit to the current preoccupation of all of us, in fact, how do you see how the energy sector in Canada, both sector as a whole, but also the workers, talking about the inclusivity, are affected from the COVID-19 in general? What is the picture there?
Well, I feel like we've been through all of this together. You, myself, and ministers from all over the world. This has been a tumultuous period, no question about it, as you said in your opening remarks there. Our petroleum sector is critical to provinces in our country like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and here my home of Newfoundland and Labrador. 1,000 businesses, 3,500 services sector businesses, 576,000 jobs. Of those, about 11,000 Indigenous people. And as we've talked, the sector was hit with the double whammy of increased supply and cratering demand. So workers have suffered. It's been a roller coaster in terms of prices. It's been hard. By June, Canadian producers had shut in approximately 1 million barrels per day of production, so 20% of our total production, and reduced planned capital investment. But reports are signaling that we're coming out of the crisis, that things are looking up. And I keep driving the point that there will not be a recovery of the oil and gas sector. So we took action to support the sector with an economy-wide wage subsidy, similar to many of our European counterparts, and we're improving that now. In fact, I'll be in the House of Commons later to get that legislation through our House. We've got green programs to clean up inactive and abandoned wells in our provinces out west, in Saskatchewan, Alberta particularly, and British Columbia. Liquidity measures to keep the companies afloat, to keep workers employed. 80% of Canada's electricity comes from non-emitting sources. So our utilities and their workers have been working tirelessly to navigate the pandemic's impacts, and they've maintained the reliability of our electricity supply and basically, kept the lights on. Energy demand will be different following this pandemic. And so we're focusing on providing people and businesses with energy that is clean, reliable, affordable. And while our electricity supply is over 80% clean, that clean electricity only supplies about 20% of our total energy use in Canada. So we want to increase that. So we look to the future and we see a lot of opportunity to increase our options. And those include SMRs, small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, as new sources of safe, clean power. That plays a big part in our grids in Ontario especially, but also New Brunswick. And we want to invest in new technologies, battery storage, hydrogen, geothermal projects. We want to use our clean electricity to produce the cleanest LNG in the world. We're looking at ways that it can decarbonize our oil and gas sector, and we want to use that electricity that we're the second biggest producers of hydroelectricity in the world. That can allow us to become a leader in hydrogen as well. We're working with partners to develop the secure supply chains that we need for critical minerals. And that will enable the deployment of clean technologies. So all levels of government, regardless of political stripes, we've been working together to make sure that Canadian workers are protected, to make sure that they get the support that they need. I have worked diligently with my provincial colleagues and with labor unions and with industry on that score, and with my provincial colleagues and with other parties in our House of Commons, regardless of political stripe. And because of because we realize how important this is to our country. I've received tremendous cooperation from all sides of the political spectrum. So I'm happy about that. There is common cause. And we see that internationally, here when we come to these discussions at the IEA.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Mr. Minister, there is a discussion in Europe, Americas, Asia, around the world, the concept green recovery or sustainable recovery. What is your understanding from a green recovery? If you were to tell us, in the Canadian context, for example, what does it mean? Can you elaborate a bit on this?
Absolutely. And I get back to, the government puts workers first in its support measures. And I think that's both to protect their livelihoods and communities, but also to ensure that they can continue to produce the energy and the revenue that we need as the economy recovers. Second, we need to make sure that we implement green recovery measures quickly. It means finding where we can build on programs, on initiatives, but also we need to understand in a post-COVID world how how this affects our ability to move quickly. So, when it comes to green recovery, we're reaching out to others for ideas. We're actively developing solutions. As I said, here within the country, but also, international thought leaders and partners in industry and in indigenous communities in this country, in other levels of government. So energy efficiency and renewables, they will feature, I think, most prominently as green stimulus opportunities. And this includes successfully managing the immediate restarting of the economy, continuing to support businesses that are fragile, I think, as we go through this transition, and also vulnerable workers, and rebuilding supply chains and labor markets. And we need to be smart about how we approach international supply chains going forward. I think free and open trade has served us very well. It must remain a fundamental principle, I think, for us. We need to manage subsequent waves of the virus and its related impacts on the economy. And I think that we can only do that, by working together.
Excellent, and it's a very good, in fact, bridge to my next question. As the journalists say, Mr. Minister, a good bridge to the next question. Canada, this is many countries around the world looking at you, Canada. Your green and inclusive recovery, what kind of a model it can be for the rest of the world, you think? Or can the rest of the world, other countries, can and should take Canada as a role model?
I think we're a work in progress. I want to be that role model. Canadians are also known for understatement and humility. So as the Minister of Natural Resources for Canada, I bring those to bear as well. But I would say we see this as an opportunity to mobilize in the energy sector traditionally underrepresented groups, women, youth, racialized groups, indigenous people, in this post-COVID-19 recovery and in our long-term economic growth. When we hosted the Clean Energy Ministerial and Mission Innovation meeting in Vancouver, and it was before my time, it was in May of last year, we ensured that when we spoke then that workers and communities were central to all elements of the ministerial program. And we followed up, of course, with our efforts to support initiatives like Equal by 30. And Equal by 30 is about advancing the participation of women in the clean energy transition to close the gender gap in the energy sector. So if you look at research, it shows that energy companies with diversity in leadership show higher profits, greater innovation, lower risk. So we have to push that. It's in everybody's best interests because women represent, I think, just 23% of energy sector employees, 18% of energy executive roles. We can do better. It's significantly lower than almost every other sector. And I think to make real progress on inclusivity and equality, it's critical that we harness the data. I think we need to look at available data to effectively track the results and measure the progress. I announced that Canada is leading the development of a reporting framework under the Equal by 30 project, and that will enable signatories to track and report on concrete actions that were taken to close the gender the gender gap across the energy sector. I think data is crucial. And, if I'm to come forward to you and say, Canada is the model that other countries should follow, I better have the data to back that up. So that's where we are right now. But we are intent on being that model.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. It is like a music to my ears. You say data is important because we are a data-driven organization.
Yes.
We believe in data. I always say, my colleagues, data always wins at the end of the thing, because we need data to understand the success or failure of our policies. We are receiving a lot of questions, Mr. Minister. One question is you mentioned also several times today and also before during our summit, the workers, the inclusiveness and the workers, and we know that there are thousands of resource-dependent workers in Canada. What specific actions you are taking or you are considering to support them today and also throughout the transition process?
No, it's an excellent question. As I said, we can't leave energy workers and their families behind. They're too talented, experienced. We need them. And so I think that's why now is the time to make those smart investments to transition to a lower emitting economy, while government is very active in this space, to work towards net zero, to work towards that commitment of net zero emissions by 2050. I would, on the issue of inclusivity, I really want to bring this point home. We can start a green transition now, but we will not be able to sustain it unless we also commit to inclusivity. That's how we will maintain green stimulus momentum. Those who are left behind will cling to the familiar. They will choose governments rooted in the status quo. They will resist the urgency of this climate crisis. They will resist the change that is vital to confronting it, and they will resist the need for governments to be ambitious. Because change can overwhelm people. And right now, people are dealing with so much change and uncertainty. In fact, I don't even like saying the word transition too often. I just like concentrating on what the goal is here, which is lowering emissions. But as I said to you earlier, I think that's why energy efficiency is so important. Things like home retrofits, better insulation, windows, smart thermostats. People can get their heads around those sorts of things. When they save money on their power bills, when they lower their emissions, and energy efficiency gets us towards our Paris goals in a big way. 40% of the actions required for countries to meet their Paris goals will come from energy efficiency. It's the hidden fuel. It's the cheapest, most available. It may not get the same attention. It may not be as sexy, but that 40% is more than the share for renewables. It accounts for more than 1/3 of Canada's planned emissions reductions to reach our Paris commitment. So I think that encouraging and enabling Canadians to be a part of the change in their homes, in their places of work, it involves them in a meaningful way. And also, it's very important that the labor that's involved is very local as well. So when you come from a place, that's on, literally on the physical margins of a country like we are, way off in the furthest eastern corner of Canada, if you're going to retrofit my home, if you're going to be making investments in this regard, then you're going to have to be at my home or at my commercial space, at my building, in order to get that done. So it localizes the work as well. I think energy efficiency will be crucial to retrain, to expand our labor markets. We're investing $225 million over the next 4 years, 75 million per year after that in developing those skills. And getting back to your point about data, we want to examine major labor trends. We want to identify the emerging skills that are in demand now, and we feel will be there in the future to develop, to test, to evaluate new approaches in skills development, and to share those results and best practices, I think, across the board. Here at the IEA, to share it with the public sector, the private sector, not-for-profit sectors. It's data-driven, it's inclusive, but your point about data is excellent. there is also, people have to feel part of that narrative in an emotional way. They have to feel part of it as part of their daily lives. They do not want to feel left behind. The good news is, in my experience, in my time, not only as Minister of Natural Resources, but before this is my time as Minister of Indigenous Services and my time as a Member of Parliament, before that as a journalist, most people want to be part of this project, of this great global project of lowering emissions.
Exactly.
They just want it done in an accessible way. It is just so much. It is such a monumental challenge. But I will say this, you know, when I look at the cooperation, the goodwill, the collective goodwill that has existed, or that we see exhibited in our countries right now, collectively around the globe, that holds us in good stead. You know, we are combating a pandemic here. And, you know, while we still have a lot of work to do, I think that, you know, it's amazing how on an individual level, people are willing to come together and recognize that the small sacrifices and big sacrifices that some people are making will benefit others in their community across their country and around the world. And if we can take that goodwill and transition that to the transition we have to make in the energy sphere and combating climate change, we'll be in a good place.
Yes, I think this is excellent, Mr. Minister. One expression you use, I want to underline this. Of course, I know it is very difficult to push this green recovery, especially in a country where you have huge oil and gas resources. Very difficult, but to feel that your people want this transition and to feel that they are behind you, I am sure gives you additional energy in dealing with these issues, to have the backing of the public, majority of the public being with you is making you much stronger and giving you more energy to deal with these issues. Talking about, again, coming back to energy, Mr. Minister, Canada is, I feel, when I look from here, from Paris, you look at all the energy technologies, the clean energy technologies for the future. Are there any of them that you feel Canada is better prepared than others? Any clean energy technology? You mentioned the hydrogen, you mentioned SMR, CCUS, a very important technology. Any of the technologies you think Canada can lead it globally, alone or with other countries?
Well, there's been an awful lot of talk about hydrogen in the past, particularly in the past, I think, couple of months. Fatih, when you look at the European Union's Green Recovery Plan, and particularly the significant investments that Germany is looking at making in hydrogen, and we feel very confident in the hydrogen space. Canada has actually been working in this space for about 100 years, and you know, continue. I think we're at that point though where that we're bringing it in from the margins and it's going mainstream now. And you know, I continue to read you know, press from reputable sources that are not just optimistic but very realistic in the hydrogen space. Of course, we've got a bounty of natural gas, and combine that with you know, our know-how when it comes to carbon capture and storage. You know, that gives us plenty of room in that space, but also you know, not just in blue hydrogen, but in green hydrogen as well. So, you know, we're looking at electrification and how that can help in the hydrogen space. But in battery technologies, we've got some of the leading companies in the world, particularly out in British Columbia on the other side of Canada. You know, Ballard is one of many companies that are out there. I think some 50 companies that are out there that are working in this space. I was speaking to the Danish ambassador to Canada, I think just 2 weeks ago. We were talking about how there are buses at universities in Copenhagen that are powered by Ballard hydrogen batteries. So I think that's going to be significant for us. I think that energy efficiency is going to be significant for us, and I count that as a fuel, to take a phrase that you use often. I also think that Canada has a terrific advantage in the nuclear space and small modular reactors, and I think that's emerging as a technology that could play a significant role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time delivering the jobs that we need. I mean, you know, these small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, there are real advantages in specific applications, I think, like mine sites or remote communities where they can provide continuous power. We have a roadmap now for SMRs. We're quite excited about the work that we're doing there. We are renowned around the world. I will take back classic Canadian humility and say that we are renowned around the world for our CANDU reactors, but also for our regulatory regime, which is top notch. And so we are trusted by players in the space to be safe, which is extraordinarily important, but also to be competitive. So I think those are two that we were looking at very, very carefully. And again, you know, coming back to hydroelectricity, a leader there. And I look at the forward thinking of our oil and gas companies. I think that we have seen over the past year, particularly, Fatih, the investment community is looking for jurisdictions that are taking net zero seriously. Our oil and gas companies are responding. Both in Alberta, especially, which is the majority of our oil and gas market, but also in Saskatchewan and here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We are looking at ways of lowering our emissions and making investments in that space because we know that that's what the investment community is demanding.
Mr. Minister, I can tell you, I appreciate very much the how you put it together and how Canada puts it together. You want to make use of all clean energy technologies. This is very, very good. It's an example for me for the many countries around the world, because what I see, Mr. Minister, when I look at the climate change debate in our summit in Davos, when I discuss with the business leaders, or in different meetings, people generally have their favorite clean energy technology. They like solar, but they don't like wind. They like hydro, but they hate nuclear power or CCUS. I think we don't have this luxury.
No.
That we push our own favorite technology. The issue is not to boost our egos, but to reduce the emissions. So if we are really serious about that, we should go ahead in that direction, in my view. Mr. Minister, we have many, many questions. I have to, unfortunately, I know how busy you are. We have only time for one last question, and this is I will be selfish this time and want to ask you one question. You are working with us. We are so honored since 8 months or so, but with Canada, a very important member of the International Energy Agency. You follow our work very closely. I thank you very much. If you want to leave this meeting, me and my colleagues, with one piece of advice for the future, the IEA, or to me as the head of the IEA, one piece of advice for the next months, years to come, what would it be, Mr. Minister?
I will cheat, Fatih, and I will say three things. If I was to narrow it down to one, I would say just continue to do what you do and to be outspoken. And I think and to build on that, firstly, I would say continue being smart and know that we need to use every ounce of our ingenuity, I think, to make our traditional sources of energy more sustainable through electrification, through carbon capture and storage, through evolving clean technologies. Jobs, I think, will be retrained, but they will still be good jobs. We need, secondly, to be thorough. And that means looking at those smaller individual choices, appealing to people at at their level. So that making those individual choices, you have collective results. So, better appliances, better light bulbs, better windows, better building codes, better cars. When people see those changes happening at home and in their places of work, they'll be more willing to take on the larger things that collectively we need to do. But through those choices, they will feel part of the change. So just always remember, as we deal with national and international players, that it is the individual citizens that will make the difference. And thirdly, to continue to be thoughtful, to drive this post-COVID recovery, to advance our commitment to net zero. We have to be inclusive. We must include people. We must include every region of our countries. We must include them in these decisions. we must factor in the human element of our policies and how they will affect communities across the country and therefore around the world. We must aim to make sure that no one is left behind. And every time I come here, those messages resonate, I think, with people who collect here, and I'm greatly inspired every time I come here.
Mr. Minister, thank you very much for, first of all, being our host together. Very much appreciated your wonderful speech and giving so straight, quick, and precise answers to my humble questions. Thank you very much, sir. And I am very much looking forward to host you in Paris, close to Eiffel Tower, enjoying a cup of coffee and talking about energy and other issues. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, on my behalf and on behalf of the thousands of people following this discussion around the world.
And Fatih, I will look forward to having perhaps a pot of tea with you here in St. John's, Newfoundland, one of the less known but very important energy capitals of Canada.
Avec plaisir, Monsieur le Ministre.